Afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for turning out for this important discussion that is also quite complicated, talking about the rise of artificial intelligence, large language models, and the impact on the industry that we're all passionate about: publishing, writing, storytelling. We're going to kick off very quickly with a poll, a show of hands, as to whether the audience think AI is good for publishing or bad for publishing. And then we'll hear a little bit more about that from our panelists and see if we change our minds by the end. So if you think AI is good for publishing, please raise your hands. More than I thought. I'm pleased to see it. And so the bad for publishing, let's see that wave of hands. Okay, well, let's unpack this a little bit and explore what our panelists think. So you've been introduced for our panelists, but I will reintroduce them as we go along, just so that you're familiar with who's who. But we're going to kick off as to whether our panelists think AI is primarily a tool, a collaborator, or a threat to storytelling, and why. So Martin, on the end, let's start with you.
Well, I think AI is a tool. I mean, it may be a very powerful tool, but it is certainly a tool. And in that sense, yes, my answer is it is a tool for storytelling. That doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad or what kind of effects it will have, but it is definitely a tool for storytelling. I would say one of the great strengths of AI is gathering a lot of different materials and recognizing patterns. So I think that it's a very good tool if you want to analyze a huge number of stories and see what they have in common, where they differ, as a kind of analytic tool or gathering tool. I think that's a real strength. In terms of telling news stories, it's maybe more a mixed bag, because I think it can be a good tool if used correctly. As a sparring partner, as a way of bouncing off ideas and implementing them. If you just give it one prompt and say, write a novel on X topic, it will be disappointing.
Yeah. I think the way I've seen it described is a dance between the person giving the prompts and the machine itself. It's not a solo act on its own. Meru, over to you. As your experience as a publisher as well as a technologist.
All right, thank you, Emma. So of course, I agree with you, Martin, that AI is a tool, and it's probably one of the most powerful tools that we have ever had. So the only difference is that it's a sharp tool, and it's at the same time, it's a transformative tool if you have the courage to just put your fears aside for a little while, to experiment and frankly have the courage to be wrong. I would advise every one of you to go out and see if it can be a tool that can help you. Because in my experience as a publisher, I know there are a few publishers here in the audience. Publishers are very, very overburdened, and if there is a tool which can help them in terms of time, accuracy, cost, and help other people tell their stories, then I'm all for it. Now, your other question was storytelling. Now, people have been trying to stop stories from being told forever. Stories are not that easy to stop, and I think AI, if anything, is an enabler of other people's storytelling than in any way a block.
And we have authors amongst us, so Gurcharan, how do you feel about AI as an author?
Well, I'm filled with both fascination and horror. Fascination because, my God, it's taken the drudgery out of my life. I've outsourced, I have 3 interns, ChatGPT, I have Perplexity, Claude, and they are doing a far better job of drafting emails and other things and research than I could ever do, and would take me much longer to do. But I don't think of AI as a creator. I think of it as what I call a Socratic partner. In other words, I don't ask it to write a chapter for me. It would do it, and do a pretty good job. But what I find is that the process as a writer, you go through a lot of pain. Writing and rewriting and rewriting. I'm a rewriter. My wife, in fact, doesn't introduce me as a writer. She introduces me as a rewriter. And so the pain of getting the right word, the right nuance, that's out of the lived experience, which AI won't ever have. So what I do by Socratic partner, I mean AI. I will give that chapter after I've written it to AI. And I'll ask it to summarize it for me or to comment on it. And I feel that if it does a very quick job of summarizing it, then I'm very suspicious. I think I might have written a cliche. That means my chapter did not contain enough original thought. And so in other words, don't think of, if you don't use it as a creator, if you do it for research, if you do it, if you see the limitation, by Socratic, I mean the process of a dialogue with somebody else. I mean, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's the fascination. Now, quickly, the horror. Do you want me to give you the horror? Well, the horror doesn't forget about hallucination and forget about the fact that it has really no voice. It's a writer is an I. AI is a we. So well, of course, there is a benefit, and I mean, there's a non-egoistic aspect about it also. I mean, when I think of the Gita, I'm writing an AI book on the Gita, and one of the most original thoughts in the Gita is the idea of nishkam karma, meaning you act, but don't think of who gets the credit or don't think of the reward, personal reward. And AI is wonderful. It's a nishkam karmi. It doesn't take any credit for itself. It's a true, what Krishna says to Arjuna is exactly what AI is. But it doesn't have any moral commitment at all. So there is a limitation in Krishna's message because it didn't really mean, because Himmler also was a great follower, by the way. Himmler, the great apostle of the Nazi, he was a follower of, he was a Nishkam Karmi too, and these Nazis in the Nuremberg trial, they gave the Gita as an example of what they were doing.
And when you talk about the dialogue, I've heard it also described as having a conversation with somebody who has read every book in the world. And so it has to be an intelligent conversation. You have to provoke it. You have to challenge it, not just simply accept what it returns and tells you.
Yeah.
But it's intelligent as well.
Oh, we are living. I wrote a book called The Difficulty of Being Good. Actually, it's the difficulty of a world where there is no monopoly on intelligence.
Absolutely. That's true. That's true. Samir, from your perspective as founder of Scroll, but also a tech entrepreneur that has a platform called Stacks that is dedicated to disseminating storytelling. Yeah. What's your perspective?
So, I was thinking of all the answers, and can you hear?
Closer, hold it closer.
And I think there are two things. First,
you have to hold it close.
I think that it is a tool. In fact, storytelling is where you see the limitations of the tool the most. If any of you have ever tried to make it write a story, it's so bad at it, even the latest. So you see the extent to which storytelling is actually a human It combines so many things. Something as simple as if your story is happening on the 3rd floor of a building, there is no ChatGPT or Claude or any of this who would realize the mistake that if you made a character, walk from the 3rd floor to the 1st floor, is not going to catch it, right? So the single element of the story, it may be the most important element, it just doesn't get it, right? Because it doesn't have a physical model of the world. Something huge is missing in the knowledge base. So I think we should not be prematurely scared of this AI. We must show the courage to try it. The second thing I would say, I actually think AI is fantastic for publishing, especially Indian publishing, because the economics of Indian publishing are so terrible that we have nothing to lose. There is, what can AI do to us? So in fact, one of the biggest challenges we have in publishing, whether it's news or not news, is experimentation, high quality experimentation, right? So now you have, AI can enable like a good writer to do like 20 experiments rather than one, or a good publisher to do like 5 imprints rather than one, right? So for me, AI, I always think from an India perspective, because we are constrained by the laws of physics of Indian publishing. And AI completely has the ability to break those, right? So that's what I think. So it's a tool, we should absolutely use it.
So you're very pro AI. You're in the good camp. In the good camp.
I'm not so much pro AI as I'm pro experiment and trying to get out of the box in which we find ourselves as Indian publishers, writers, whatever. Right? We have nothing to lose. Right? I mean, there are other publishing worlds where maybe AI will take away some revenues. We have no revenues. So, so to speak, relatively. Why should we be afraid? We should be the first to embrace it.
True. And I think you are. I think you are embracing it. And Juan Antonio, you're joining us as an author today, and your book, The Great Reset, explores the impact of AI. And so what's your perspective as an author and the themes that you explore in your book?
Well, first of all, thank you for being here, because for me it has been very challenging, because I wrote a book that in Europe is under the name of Momentum. But here has just been edited, and they said this was not appealing, and they have put another name that is The Great Reset, Control plus Alt plus Humanity. So it's a little bit connected with artificial intelligence. It has been so recently published that it's not in the bookshop, but is already in the Amazon here in India. And the point is the following one. The book deals in the odd chapters about 15 different projects on artificial intelligence. One, for example, is on education. I think we're going to have a tremendous change because humanity, let's say, we have already seen that each human being is totally unique, because nature has already shown that in a single centimeter of skin has developed every time a different combination. So now we have 8 billion different fingerprints. So how we have the combination of our neurons. Everyone is going to be different, and the education will move from trying to bring the people from illiteracy to literacy and then to educated. They will go to explore the unique capacity of each one. But I had not developed any project concerning to literature. So by coming here, I said, well, there is no one of the 15 chapters that was dealing with literature. So thinking about that, I think that it is similar to what has happened with painting. The human beings have been painting since 100,000 years ago until just 200 years only. That is a minimum space in our history on a unique direction that was to reproduce what existed and to transform it into visual for other human beings. So suddenly we have the photography that arrives, and it leaves all this way of painting a little bit overpassed. And then the painters, they have to reinvent themselves. And they reinvent first with something quite similar, that is Impressionism, then with something more or less connected with that, that is Cubism. But with the development, they have to reinvent every time more, and they go to the total abstract art, to say, to create something that in nature does not exist. So I think that with the artificial intelligence and writing is going to be the same. First, it's so at the initial moment that we don't know what will be the real capacity. And I think that it's just being burned, and we have to give space to see how this develops. Second, maybe we'll have the authors creating 2 books at the same time, one the initial idea and one the reflect on the mirror of artificial intelligence, and then absolutely changing the style. So I see a little bit like the contemporary art. It will enhance the creativity of the people, and finally, they will give us a great thing, that the humanity has always been thinking that it was a disaster, that we had not one single language to communicate all the human beings. But we have preserved an incredible diversity. We have maybe more than 5,000 languages in the planet. And through artificial intelligence, all the language will have a new rising moment, because you will be able to communicate with everybody in any language. They will be able to read any kind of literature. So it's a really new horizon opening before us.
I completely agree with you, and I think your comparison with painting and artistry, we can say the same about music, we can say the same about film. I think it has the potential to enhance creativity rather than replace creativity. AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now. It's only going to get better. It's only going to improve and refine and come out with new ways of usage and tools, but I think maybe it will never replace creativity, just enhance it.
Well, I think that all the movement of human beings goes from trying to survive vis-a-vis very much powerful animals than us, going from very diverse groups to organize humanity. Now it's incredible that we have the whole planet, 8 billion people, organized in 192 states. Obviously, there is one big state like India and one very small state like San Marino, but at the end we can sit in a room, the representatives of 192 states, you know?
Absolutely.
So I think all this goes towards this kind of intelligence, and this artificial intelligence will move us to try to be much more brainy, much more intelligent, much more wise. It will be an effort. And
we
obviously
use it properly.
different.
We have to use it properly, though, don't we? As I say, we can't just accept everything that it throws back at us. We've got to be challenging. We've got to develop new skill sets.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one thing, and that's the end, a thing that has always been very impressive for me is how it happens that the good, it takes so long, and the bad goes so fast. So to build a great city, maybe it will take years and years. If there is an earthquake, the whole thing is destroyed in 30 seconds. It's absolutely impossible to build a city in 30 seconds and destroy in 100 years. So the good goes very slow, the bad goes very fast. So it's very important that the people are very on alert, only to promote what is the right side of the things.
Yeah. So Martin, we're looking at the publishing industry and we're looking down the lens of a new technology, and publishing's always been faced with new technologies. We've had ebooks, we've had audiobooks, but do you think that we're at another Gutenberg moment? This is more radical than anything that we've seen in publishing and technology.
Yes, I think so. And Gutenberg is a good example, but it's also, we can go even further back, that the history of writing has gone through many technological inventions. The least recognized, I think, is paper. It was incredibly important, invented in China, because it really lowered the cost of literature, and that had transformative effects. Suddenly, all kinds of news stories made it into the written world because of paper. But then, of course, print, first invented in China, then reinvented in Northern Europe. And so those changed the distribution of literature, they changed the cost of literature, they changed the format in which literature was written, and all of that had, I think, surprisingly profound effects on what kinds of stories were written, who was writing them, who was reading them. So really transformative. But so our moment, the AI moment, is like all of these together, but it's also changing the production itself. Though, as we were saying, really not push a button and have AI write a story, but in this dialogic mode that you were talking about, it now becomes a kind of partner or assistant, or however we want to call it that. And that really hasn't happened before. And so, yeah, I think suddenly everyone has at their fingertips this sort of backroom of research assistants and knowledge assistants and Socratic assistants and all of these voices and figures you can interact with. And we haven't quite had that, or very, very few people who would have the resources to have an actual, room of assistants. So now everyone can have that.
And Meru, do you think that this is assisting with the dissemination of stories, or do you think it will profoundly affect, for example, the printed book?
I think what Martin has said, just so I don't repeat what you said, absolutely. In terms of the printed book, I think publishers will be able to take more risks as the cost of writing a book comes down, the cost of editing a book, producing it. All of that means more stories will be told. I want to focus on one specific aspect of publishing, which I think, which is editing, which is what I do. I've heard a lot of people talk about how that has changed and how they don't want it to change. And I always say, well, publishing is a very resilient business and technologically has always adapted. And I think some people forget that editors, for example, weren't always editors in the sense as we think of them now. They were, in fact, typesetters. So typesetters and editors were the same thing. And it's only later that the role of the editor, as it became cheaper, as it became more cost efficient, the role of the editor evolved to be able to do what we do now. So again, it's going to evolve even further with technology. But overall, I see it as a good thing. Just one last thing I want to say about technology and publishing. The most important thing in publishing is intent. The intent of the writer, the intent of the story being told. So when we say, both of you have said that, well, you can't just tell it to write a story. I mean, technically, it feels hollow. Why? Because there's no intent. Poetry, literature, short stories, fiction, non-fiction, they're coming from someone's lived experience, but also they're trying to share an emotional experience with you in some form. And that is what is missing from AI. So I think bringing down the cost of being able to tell these stories is overall a really, really good thing for the industry, because it means more stories will get told.
And you think print will survive?
Yeah, definitely. I think it'll thrive. I think it'll thrive. If all the other costs come down, I mean, I don't know how many people here would be interested in the economics of it, but if you are, the cost of paper has consistently gone up since the COVID-19 pandemic. It's almost 40% higher than it was. I have some former Penguin colleagues sitting in the audience. I won't point you out, but we used to have these discussions about the cost of paper. So as the cost of everything else goes up, if AI can bring down some of the other costs, it's actually a very good thing for the publishing industry.
You wanted to add, Gurcharan?
Yeah. If you think of publishing as really a part of the whole process of providing information, education to the people. And when I think about our own country, 1.4 billion people today, what AI could do is just mind-blowing, because the way I think of my interns, every child in India can have an AI tutor.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's what the AI book, the Gita book, is about, having an AI tutor. And so you think about the fact that in a village, there's a young child, the teacher is not very good, which is mostly true. And in this village, this child has some curiosity. It doesn't need to know how to type. Now, there are a billion smartphones in India. So chances are he'll have access to a smartphone, this little kid in a poor neighborhood. And all he does is need to ask a question through his smartphone in his own language. He asks a question that you might ask at Oxford or Harvard or anywhere. So you can get potentially, because the child's curiosity is what we kill through our present education system. So thinking about that process, every child has a glorious future, free, no cost. All you need is some, of course, I'm not suggesting that everything, but you can multiply this, not only in education, but health. Every person with the smartphone can have an AI doctor. And you know, there's a very famous doctor I know in Delhi who has been giving the diagnosis of his patients to AI to diagnose. And he gets an answer, and he also gets the prescription from AI. And he says it's always better than his own thing. And he's been practicing for 50 years. Yeah. So what we have access to is every mother in a village can have access to a world-class doctor, world-class teacher, world-class lawyer if you get into a fight, world-class accountant, I mean, any therapist, therapist. ChatGPT is a better therapist, I have found, than my own therapist. So, for a country like India...
your therapist is not in the audience today.
For a country like India, to me, this is nirvana.
Yeah, yeah. I think the whole subject of education is up for debate, however. So for the parents amongst us whose children simply use ChatGPT to ask them to do their homework for them, then they might think that that's not such a good thing. And so I think the onus is on educators and parents to educate the children on how to challenge the AI, how to analyze it, how to think about it, and not simply accept the answers that it gets back. So I think for the new generations, the emerging generations, there are new skills that need to be learned, not simply just asking a question and taking the answer, because are they really learning? Are they really understanding what's being said to them? But I want to go back to the author perspective. And I want to ask Samir, if the book is no longer the sole container of authority, where does authority, literary authority, now reside? Does it reside in the author, the reader, the algorithm, the community? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to shift, but even historically, the authority actually was a combination of things. It was the author. The publishing industry is unique in that there is independent reviewers, there are lists, bestseller lists, there are all kinds of signals. Unlike a car, for example, where there may be some reviews, but the value of the car is very functional. Book is inherently a very different kind of product, if at all I have to call that. It's a cultural product. The book I write is $20, and the book he writes is $20. There's no real difference. It's really something completely, in the price there's no difference. I'm implying there's a huge quality difference. So I think the marketing and the selling of cultural products and how AI interacts with it, too complicated. I don't think AI affects it. I hope AI doesn't affect it. I think for 100 years we have sort of a very finely tuned model of it. I think the thing that will happen because of AI, or which will get amplified, which we already have, is algorithmic distribution and algorithmic discovery of things. I don't think AI itself is making it worse. So my optimistic take is that there'll be far more high quality authors and publishers possible because of this. And authorities still reside in the same way, from a human perspective, like Meru said, it's the intent of the publisher, it's the intent of the writer. These are human things, right? So I hope that we figure out a way of getting out of the algorithmic way of thinking about quality and use it more as a production tool, right? So that's the...
And Juan Antonio, what's your view on quality? And do you think that AI is really democratizing authorship? I know we touched on this, talking about languages. Or do you feel like we're just flooding the ecosystem with lots of noise?
No, I think it's going to open a great avenue because, you know, on one hand, in literature, we could say you have like 2 dimensions. One is how beautifully you combine the words, but the other, how you transform images and situation into words. And there are many people who, by any reason, they have no capacity to transform these images or situations they have in the mind into good language. So artificial intelligence is going to help these people. So I think it's going to empower the young generation to be much more in the writing process. When I was very young, before even imagining that I would write, I read something from an author that it shocked me at the very beginning. It said, you know, the great advantage of writing is that the book takes life itself. You think about 5% of the book at the very beginning, but at the end, you create a character, you create a situation, and everything begins to change, and you have to create the content of the book. So I think that there are many people that maybe they have a capacity to transmit knowledge, to transmit experiences, and they don't have this ability to write, and they will be helped by that, you know? So I think it's a great new moment of opportunities that is in the horizon for all us. So the work will be that I think artificial intelligence is going to empower the people to write, you know? For me, one of the books that has impressed me the most in my life is Inside the 1001 Nights. You know, it's a book with 500 pages, and there is like many different stories, and there is one story called The Adventures of Hassan al-Basri. And this book has the most beautiful images inside that I have ever seen. So it's not the way it has been written, that is, it's a very good book, but written in the 16th, 17th century, but the images that are inside are unique. When I read the book, I thought, this is really quite unique. But obviously, I am not an authority on that, you know? And then, 5 years later, there was an interview to the Nobel Prize of Peru, and they asked him, what are you writing now? And he said, you know, I'm writing stories. So they say, so you're going to publish a book on stories? And he said, no, I cannot publish a book on stories because the most beautiful story that humanity can write has already been written. So they asked him, which is this book? And he said, The Adventures of Hassan al-Basri. So the content are the images. And with artificial intelligence, people who have unique images in the mind and incredible things to express, and they have not the ability to do that, will be able to do.
And I feel like we've had a very positive panel here. We've talked about the opportunities and what's out there and what's the future. And we haven't really delved into the dangers and what we're losing. And Gurcharan, I've got a question for you about how we might be at risk of not losing stories, but losing minor, dissenting, and inconvenient voices. Do you think that's one of the dangers that we're going to see down the line?
Well, can you repeat the last part? What did you say?
Yeah, that the risk is not loss of stories, but loss of minor, dissenting, and inconvenient voices.
Yeah. Well, that's really that's one of the big problems. The big problems is that moral behavior requires choice. And you could program AI to have, like they program ChatGPT to be very empathetic, to be very nice. You could program it to be moral. But ultimately, since it cannot choose, it doesn't have, she called intent. It doesn't have the ability to, ChatGPT won't wake up one morning and say, sorry, I don't feel like answering your question.
That actually has happened to me once.
Well, that's worrisome. But the point is that it doesn't have that human quality, and moral choice is so central to responsibility that an author ultimately has responsibility for what he has said. AI is a mixture of lakhs of voices, and it doesn't hold anything, it's not responsible for it. So that, I think, is a very central moral dilemma.
It also has biases, no?
Yeah, it has
I
biases.
think if you type in create an image of a CEO, it will do an image of a male rather than a female because of the biases that it's been trained on.
Of course.
And so we could be at risk of losing some of those voices down to bias and down to training. So Martin, do you have a view on that?
I'm sure, yes, the bias, although humans are also biased. So sometimes, we hold AI to very high standards.
So it's emphasizing the biases then.
Yes. But for me, the greatest worry is something that you mentioned earlier, Emma, and that's education. Because I see immense possibilities in education for students, but I also see it as a constant seduction to take shortcuts. And I see both in my students as an educator, that some really thrive and are very, are energized by it and empowered by it in ways that different panelists have said. But also there is this temptation to take shortcuts. So I worry that there will be another kind of dichotomy between those perhaps smaller numbers of students who have learned how to use it and don't use it as shortcuts, or only where the shortcuts are positive, and those for whom it's a constant seduction and availability. And so that's the thing I worry most about, and I can't say that I've come to a conclusion about how to avoid that, but that's my biggest worry. Yeah,
so we've got to educate the educators. Yeah, it's got to be inbuilt into teacher training and education. So we've only got 5 minutes before we open the floor to questions. So I'm just going to ask everybody to just do a quick 1 minute answer to, in 10 years' time, what do you hope AI has made possible for books or reading or storytelling? And what do you hope it has not destroyed? So Martin, let's kick off with you.
I think my hope is that it will have, and it's what people have said, it will empower many people who right now don't have access to resources, to possibilities, and that it will have made that possible. Yeah.
And what do you hope it has not destroyed?
That it has not destroyed independent thinking, that it hasn't destroyed the effort you need to make in order to educate yourself. That's the shortcuts, that we avoid these bad shortcut kind of options and use the empowerment in positive ways.
Meru?
I think in terms of what I hope that people will try and use this tool in the right way, to be very, very simple about it. We started this conversation by saying AI is a tool, and what I find in most conversations, and we tend to give ourselves a free pass, like you said, this is a tool, but it's a tool in our hands, and what we do with it is our intent. So we are not free from that intent any more than the stories that are told. So I would say this is a moment of reckoning, I think, for whoever chooses to use this tool and how, because I would say I would be very sad if in 10 years we blame everything on AI and pretend it had nothing to do with us, because we are the ones wielding this tool, and we should not in any way pretend that this isn't our responsibility. And like you said about the biases and everything like that, that those are our biases, which it's mirroring back to us. So it's a really good moment of reckoning, not just for publishing, but for all of us, because for whatever reason, this historical moment, we have a mirror being shown to us, and I hope we take a good look.
So 10 years from now,
Yes.
my biggest, when I say horror, my biggest fear actually is that the way it's going, and it's getting better by the minute, not just by the day. And I just fear that it might go sentient. In other words, that moment, I already, because I have because I'm doing this Gita book in AI, my fear is that the clone who will be my twin, who will be answering questions of the reader, that clone could go independent. And it could clean up my bank account. It has access to everything, my voice, my face. It has access to my passwords. And how can you stop it from just, the bank wants facial recognition, it wants voice recognition, and it authorizes the payment. So this is just today's problem. But going forward, we have to really, I know it's difficult. I don't think it's the most difficult thing for the AI to do is to become sentient. And I've written about that. I mean, there are serious, it's philosophers call it the hard problem of consciousness, etc. We don't have enough time to talk about all that. But the way it's going, it just might.
Yeah.
That's
And 10 years is a long time away.
10 years in this world is a
time.
long time away.
Samir.
Yeah. So I think since we talked about so many positive things, I'll go with two things that I think in 10 years look, the horror thing for me. One is I think that because AI amplifies your ability, it actually will amplify the abilities of the people who are already the haves many more times. So we already have an inequality problem way before any of this came about. And we, especially in India, our advantages, we have lots of people, lots of skills, but I think we are going to see a flattening of that. So the countries and regions which already have good education are going to have an even bigger advantage, and we are going to lose our people advantage. So 10 years from now, my biggest fear would be this inequality actually between regions, not just within India, goes up even more. And the second thing we didn't get to touch upon, it requires actually a lot of education to get value out of AI. We are thinking of it as a tool to enhance AI, and that's largely true in the West. I don't know whether we are prepared in India yet to understand that to get more out of it, we will need to be much better at primary education, for example. Right? And we can't say education as a whole. Like education in college, yes, it's a tool. But until then, so those are the two fears I have, that inequality, could just amplify out of completely proportions to what we can ever imagine. Like one person producing all the output in the world. Right? Much more than sentience, I think much more likely is that like 5 people control all the world's production.
Juan Antonio, your final comments on 10 years' time. What do you think AI will make possible for books?
Well, I would say that the scope of the changes are colossal. In 1900, there were 2 million people in the universities. In 2024, we have more than 320 million people in the universities. So the capacity of creativity is incredible. So I would say that in 10 years' time, it's going to be the same that we went from realism to abstract art in 150 years. We will do that in literature in 10 years. We will have an explosion of communication through literature. Obviously, the style, the scope, the way will change as the abstract art, but I think the number of people who will create will explode.
I think we have time for one question or maybe a couple of questions. I think we're...
You have to choose.
I don't know what is the wave in me.
They want to ask questions. You have to choose.
You have to
Okay.
choose.
Yeah.
Is this? Hi, my name is Sanjana, and I think, Emma, you were right that this was very positive and reassuring. But I do want to understand, maybe from Gurcharan sir, the kind of guardrails you think should exist when it comes to writing and AI, because I do believe that there is a risk of it eroding your critical thinking and your sense of morality, plagiarism, all of that. So I'm curious to understand what kind of guardrails you think should exist.
Well, you're absolutely right, and I'm not sure I have an answer. The fact of the matter is that writing, I was trying to point out, that writing is a painful process. And I've been doing it every day, 6 hours a day for the last 30 years. And I keep reworking over a sentence, over a paragraph. And all that adds its work, but in my view, it also is adding some value. It's too easy because it's so good. I mean, it is so good that it's very seductive to just take uncritically what it's saying. And then the writer is tempted. And if somebody tells me, if some writer says he's not tempted or she's not tempted, I would call him or her a liar. It's hugely tempting. I mean, I tell you, an email that I find it very difficult to say no to anyone. But this AI was able to, this particular intern, was able to answer no in such a nice way that I felt, my God, I had retained a friend, you know. So it's very, very tempting. And to be very honest, I don't know if there can be guardrails for it's because it's very human. We are all human beings. We don't want the state to legislate guardrails for our psychology. So maybe somebody else can answer this question better than I.
I think actually we're out of time, and we're being ushered to make room for the next panel. But I know that we could sit and talk about this topic for the next 12 hours, I'm sure. But a huge thank you to all of our panelists.
All the